never thought I'd be the person telling one of these stories, but here I am, sitting in a room that finally feels like mine, wondering if I ever truly had a family at all. Was I wrong for finally tearing the mask off a 20-year-old lie, even if it meant destroying the only home I ever knew? I need you to listen to this and tell me if you would have stayed quiet or if you would have burned it all down just like I did. For as long as I can remember, my life was defined by the sound of my sister, Chloe, chewing. It's a strange thing to be haunted by, but when you're falling asleep to the literal pains of an empty stomach, while the girl in the next room is being served hand-carved steak and organic berries, that sound becomes your entire world. My parents, Mark and Sarah, didn't just favor Chloe, they worshipped her. To them, she was a porcelain doll that needed constant polishing, while I was more like a draft horse, meant to work, meant to stay out of sight, and meant to survive on the bare minimum. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching my mom plate up a massive chicken pot pie for Chloe. It was golden brown, steaming, and smelled like heaven. When I stepped forward, hopping for a slice, my mom didn't even look at me. She just pointed toward the pantry and told me there was half a sleeve of saltine crackers and some peanut butter left. She told me that I had a sturdy build and needed to watch my intake, while Chloe was delicate and needed her strength. That was the narrative my entire childhood. I was the sturdy one, the one who didn't need much, the one who could handle the cold and the hunger. Chloe was the princess. As we got older, the disparity only got worse. By the time I was in middle school, I was the one doing all the chores. I mowed the lawn, I scrubbed the floors, and I did the laundry. I vividly remember one afternoon when I had spent 4 hours weeding the garden in the blistering July heat. I came inside, dizzy and parched, and reached for a Gatorade in the fridge. My dad literally swatted my hand away. He told me those were for Chloe's tennis practice, and that the tap water was perfectly fine for me. That night, dinner was a celebratory feast, because Chloe had come in 3rd place in a local art competition. They ordered from the most expensive Italian place in town. I sat at the table, my stomach literally growling loud enough for everyone to hear, watching them pass around lasagna, garlic knots, and calamari. My mother handed me a bowl of plain white rice with a little bit of soy sauce. She said they didn't want me to spoil my health with heavy fats. I looked at Chloe, who was smirking at me over her Shirley Temple, and I realized then that she didn't just accept the favoritism, she relished it. She knew I was hungry. She knew it wasn't fair, and she loved it. I spent my teenage years in a constant state of low-grade starvation and high-grade resentment. I took up a job at a local fast food joint the second I turned 15, not because I wanted extra pocket money, but because it was the only way I could guarantee myself a full meal 3 times a week. I would hide my paychecks because I knew if my parents found out I had money, they'd make me pay for my own modest groceries, or worse, make me buy gifts for Chloe. I remember the Christmas I turned 16. Chloe got a brand new MacBook and a designer wardrobe. I got a pack of socks and a book on finding inner discipline. It was a joke, a cruel, calculated joke, but I kept my head down. I studied like my life depended on it because I knew that a scholarship was my only ticket out of that house. I was the top of my class, a varsity track runner. Ironic, considering I was fueled by scraps, and yet my parents never attended a single one of my meets. They were always too busy at Chloe's recitals or her equestrian lessons. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. My dad said something about how they just had to get me through high school, and then the burden would be over. My mom sighed and said she felt guilty sometimes, but then she looked at a photo of Chloe on the mantle and said, "But look at her, Mark. She's the one who carries the legacy. He's just him." I cried myself to sleep that night, wondering what was wrong with me. Was I ugly? Was I stupid? Why was I a burden while she was a legacy? We looked nothing alike, which I had always attributed to me taking after some distant, rugged ancestor, while Chloe took after our mother's petite, blonde side. I was tall, dark-haired, and had a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. Chloe was tiny, fair, and soft. The breaking point didn't come until my senior year. I had been accepted into a prestigious university on a full-ride academic scholarship. I was ecstatic. I thought, for once, they would be proud. When I showed them the acceptance letter, my dad just grunted and asked if the school had a good program for Chloe, even though she was a year younger and failing half her classes. That was when the suspicion really started to take root. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a total lack of biological recognition. I didn't feel like their son. I felt like a stray dog they had taken in out of some sense of begrudging obligation. So I did something. I saved up my meager earnings from the burger joint and I bought 2 DNA kits. I told myself it was just for fun, a way to see our ancestry, but deep down, I knew I was looking for a reason. I was looking for the why behind the hunger and the coldness. I waited until a weekend when my parents took Chloe on a spa retreat to celebrate her getting a C in math. I used the kit, mailed it off, and then I waited. Those 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I went through the motions, eating my rice, doing the chores, watching them dote on the princess, all while holding a secret that could potentially blow my world apart. So that is where things stood. I was the ghost in the house, the worker bee who was never fed, while my sister lived like royalty on my parents' dime. I was standing on the edge of a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. Before I tell you what those results said and the absolute carnage that followed, I want you to stop. Look at how they treated me. Look at the starvation, the neglect, and the way they looked at me versus her. Pause the video right now and tell me in the comments. What do you think that DNA test showed? Do you think I'm overreacting, or was there something much darker going on in that house? Seriously, tell me what you would have done if you were the one eating crackers in the pantry while your sister had steak. When the notification finally popped up on my phone that the results were ready, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I logged into the portal, my fingers shaking. I clicked on DNA relatives first. There, at the very top, it said mother, unknown. Father, unknown. I refreshed the page. I thought it was a glitch. But then I saw a match for a first cousin I had never heard of, a man named David. I looked at my own ethnicity breakdown. I wasn't even the same mix as my parents. My parents were both of predominantly English and German descent. I was 50% Italian and 50% Eastern European. I wasn't their son, not even a little bit. I sat on the floor of my room, the room with the thin mattress and the peeling wallpaper, and I started to laugh. I laughed until I cried. All those years of being told I was sturdy and different weren't because of some weird genetic fluke. It was because I wasn't theirs. But how? I had birth photos. I had a birth certificate. I went to the file cabinet in my father's office that night, something I was strictly forbidden from doing. I broke the lock with a screwdriver. I didn't care anymore. I found my birth certificate. It looked real, but tucked behind it was a thick envelope from a legal firm, dated 20 years ago. I opened it and the world stopped spinning. It was a private adoption agreement, but it wasn't a standard one. It was a discretionary placement contract. My biological parents had been a young couple, university students, who had died in a car accident shortly after I was born. My parents, Mark and Sarah, had been paid a massive, lump sum endowment from my biological grandparents' estate to raise me. My biological grandparents were wealthy, extremely wealthy, but they had been old and sickly, and they wanted me to be raised in a stable, middle-class home, rather than being shuffled through the system. The contract stated that Mark and Sarah would receive a monthly stipend for my care, plus a massive trust fund payout when I turned 21, provided I was successfully raised in their home. The kicker: the stipend was 3 times the amount of my father's actual salary. They weren't just favoring Chloe. They were using the money meant for my food, my clothes, and my life to fund her lifestyle. I was their cash cow. I was the paycheck that bought the MacBook, the horse, the steak, and the spa days. They starved me to save the money for her. I felt a cold, sharp rage settle over me. It wasn't the hot rage of a child anymore. It was the calculated fury of a man who had been robbed. I didn't confront them that night. I played the long game. I had 6 months until I turned 18 and headed to college. I spent those months collecting evidence. I photographed the pantry. I recorded the conversations where they belittled me. I tracked the bank statements I found in the file, the ones showing the endowment fund being transferred into Chloe's, college savings, and my mother's home improvement accounts. I even found a ledger where my mother tracked how much she saved each month by buying me generic brand items versus Chloe's premium brands. It was all there. A paper trail of systemic neglect fueled by greed. The day I graduated high school was the day I chose for the final showdown. We were supposed to go out to a nice dinner, my parents' idea of a final goodbye before I moved out. They even invited some of their friends, probably to show off what a good job they had done raising an orphan they'd been paid to tolerate. We were sitting at a large round table at a fancy steakhouse. Chloe was complaining that the lobster tail was slightly overcooked. My mom was cooing over her, telling her she'd fix it. My dad turned to me and said, "Well, son, you're off to the real world now. I hope we've taught you enough about discipline and making do with what you have." That was it. That was the moment. I pulled a stack of envelopes out of my bag and handed one to my father, one to my mother, and one to each of their friends at the table. Inside were copies of the DNA results, the adoption contract, and the ledger showing where my trust money had actually gone. The silence that hit the table was deafening. My mother's face went from a fake, practiced smile to a ghostly white. My father's jaw dropped. One of their friends, a woman who had always been kind to me, gasped as she read the ledger. I stood up, looking at them, really looking at them for the first time. I told them I knew. I told them I knew I was a paycheck. I told them I knew they had stolen the food from my mouth to put designer clothes on Chloe's back. I looked at Chloe, who looked confused and annoyed that the attention wasn't on her. I told her, "Every bite of food you've ever eaten was paid for by my dead parents. Enjoy the lobster, Chloe. It's the last thing of mine you'll ever taste." I walked out of that restaurant without looking back, but I wasn't done. I had already contacted the legal firm listed on the contract. Since I was the beneficiary of the trust, and they had clearly violated the successful rearing clause by misappropriating funds and committing documented neglect, I filed a massive lawsuit. The aftermath was glorious. Because the contract was so specific about the funds being used for my well-being, their misappropriation was considered a breach of contract and fraud. The court froze their accounts. The house, which had been partially paid for by the stipend, had to be sold to pay back the diverted funds into my trust. Chloe had to drop out of her expensive private school because there was no more money to pay for her tutors or her artistic pursuits. My parents lost their social standing, their home, and eventually each other. They ended up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, the kind of place they always thought was beneath them. I used my trust fund to finish my degree and then some. I moved across the country, changed my last name to my biological parents' name, and I never looked back. I finally started eating. I grew another 2 inches in college once I was actually getting proper nutrition. I'm not sturdy anymore, I'm strong. Looking back, the hunger was a teacher, though a cruel one. It taught me that family isn't about blood, and it certainly isn't about a legal contract. It's about who shows up and who cares if you're full. My parents chose money over a soul, and in the end, they lost both. I used to feel guilty for ruining their lives, but then I remember the taste of those saltine crackers and the sound of Chloe's steak sizzling, and the guilt vanishes. I reclaimed my life, my name, and my future. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth doesn't just set you free. It gives you the resources to build a fortress where you'll never be hungry again. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by exposing them. Subscribe for more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did they get off too easy, or was losing everything enough of a punishment? I'll see you all in the next story.